Hey now, good morning. Getting ready for the second part. So, if you saw the last part, we laid down the white and black base coat, or black and white. And now I'm going to be talking about how to put down the primary color. So, as you can see, I'm starting with the blue. It's a mix of ultramarine blue, teal, and I add white later on to do highlights. The colors are from Golden Acrylic. They're the high flow acrylic line. They work really well in the airbrush. I like to use them a lot, and despite all the talk I did about lacquers, I still find myself using these quite a bit, especially for highlighting. I really like the way the white performs. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be laying down like a misty layer over the black and white base. The black and white base is meant to show through, and you can kind of see as the video goes along. A lot of the work that we did, all that buildup, all that pre-shading, all of that highlighting and shading is going to show through. And the idea is to keep it showing through. So that's why we spray on a very light, thin, transparent layer of our primary color. So if you notice, it's not the best layer that I'm putting down. I don't know if you can see if it comes through, but there's a little bit of like a spotty kind of finish on it, and the reason for that is that instead of me just thinning out the paint using the airbrush medium, the golden airbrush medium, I actually use something called Airbrush Transparent Extender. It's another product that they have. I thought, hey, this is a good idea. It's going to make things really clear. It's going to make things really transparent, and it's supposed to dry to a harder finish. And it actually, I think I only noticed kind of midway through, but it was I could hear just the sound of the airbrush the paint coming out of the airbrush. Like you kind of, at least I've started to detect, like when paint is a little too thick and the airbrush is like blah 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 blah. No, it doesn't sound like a car from a cartoon from the 30s, but it's you can just hear it's kind of chugging a little bit, trying to get the paint out. So in retrospect, I'd probably do that differently. Ultimately, I think I laid down a few extra layers of other colors, and with a lot of the correction that I had to do in the blending layer that I talked about before, where I come back over with my main color and I try to blend things together. So if I notice like a mistake or I did a little bit of a touch up, then I would come back in with the blend layer and try to smooth out some of that graininess that initially was laid down. So that, again, for a tank, not a huge deal. If you were doing like a car model where you want a very glossy, high quality finish with a ton of gloss to it, then that would be a different story. But on this tank, doesn't really matter. A little bit of texture will probably just help the weathering stick to it. If the problems do start if the finish is not uniform and the coverage isn't good, which I felt maybe it wasn't initially. So that's probably why I'm going to done some touch-ups. And if you notice that there's like little variations in the model from video to video, or like a step was skipped, it's probably because it has been. And one of the reasons is that I'm painting at arm's length, and I'm in order to keep the video, the quality of the video is so high and the budget so low, we like to think that we sport some of the lowest production values on YouTube. And to that end, I have to suspend a camera in front of my face most of the time, so or my phone actually, and that means that I'm way further away from the model than I want, and I might not notice things. So like usually after the fact, I'm going to go back and I'm going to touch things up, and that's not to I'd show it if I could. Unfortunately, I don't catch some things in the moment. So as I said before, there was a ton of footage, and if I was going to go back and get everything, maybe someday I'll be able to afford a camera that's over my shoulder, but this is kind of just a hobby for me. Anyhow, enough of that. All right, so let's look at my notes. Talk about the paint. Include links. I described what I'm doing with the base coat. Oh, so at some point you'll see I'll lift up the model, or I'm spraying the sponsons, and you'll notice on the inside of the sponson on this particular vehicle, I think any Land Rover will have that, but on the sponsons inside of it, there's like what looks like a slat door behind where the gun is. inside of that little piece that goes into the larger holes on the side where the sponsons are mounted. And behind that, there's like a little door. I sprayed everything with a very light tan primer. Now, in the previous episode, I said, well, the emission model is problematic, or I had a problem with it, or it wasn't good for the purpose, and it wasn't the paint. There's nothing wrong with the primer itself. So I hope that the mission model's secret police doesn't come and drag me from my home. It's that the light color for the technique that I'm trying to use, and actually really any technique. I mean, I almost always go with a black base coat or black primer. In this case, I didn't. A few of the reasons why I didn't, well, no. So anyways, the reason why it's problematic is that if you have a model and you're painting it, and then, things that are in recesses are lighter than things that are on the outside of the model, you're going to have these light spots inside of the model on the interior of it, and it's just not going to look great. So when you take pictures of it, or when people hold it up, or when you're looking at it on the table, and you're like, oh gosh, that white on the inside of that sponson is so jarring, that's a problem. Whereas if it's black, it's just going to be black, and you're really not going to see it, and it's just it enhances contrast, and it does that overall. So why didn't you use it to begin with? You're probably saying, why did you decide to go with this lighter layer? Like I said, I was doing the black and white, and you normally start from like a neutral or a mid-tone. The tan was in particular very, very light. So lesson learned, I guess. Next time I'm going to try to start from a black base coat, or maybe I'll just do regular color modulation. I don't know. Eventually, if I buy some more vehicles, I might do that on the channel, like I said. So, yeah, darker is better. And I always typically do that. About the book itself, I plan on linking that in the painting guide for AFV of World War II and Modern Era by Jose Luis Lopez Ruiz. And this is the book that I bought 5 years ago. He's got a different one now with MIG ammo, and I believe it's the same topic. I was looking at it earlier. The book that is on MIG site is 100 pages. The one I'm holding in my hands is about 82. The thing is that you get the idea without. It's like I said, it's simple to explain, but obviously it requires a lot of skill with the airbrush, and it takes practice. So, but it's a great book, and I haven't read the new one, but I bet it's probably good. I mean, inside of it, he also kind of gives recommendations on products, what colors to use as far as oil paints go, that kind of stuff. So, for me, it was very invaluable at the beginning. I still refer to it. And yeah, I just like it. So anyhow, where are we at now? Looks like we're doing some more layering. Now on that turret right there, I'm going to be painting just the base, and then later on I'm going to come back with some red over the upper area. So I'm trying to be a little bit careful with my application. Eventually, I'm probably going to add in some more highlights with the lighter colors. When I lighten things up, it's going to be using the same base colors. I'm going to be using the ultramarine blue, the teal, a couple drops of white. So at the beginning, what I started with was the ultramarine blue, maybe about, I don't know, I'd say maybe a 5-to-1 ratio of ultramarine blue to teal. And then for the second layer, I added, or the highlight layer, I added a little bit of, a little bit more teal. Well, actually, I actually start with the teal, and then I add in a little bit of ultramarine until I get to the color that I like, and then I add in a little bit of white. Initially, I was showing some mixing, but like I said, I think it's relatively easy to get a handle on it. I don't have very specific ratios. I do all my mixing by eye, either in a little tray or in the airbrush cup itself. I know I'm a heathen, and that's kind of the way that I choose to go. And I mean, That's one of the I'd say that's probably the biggest issue that I recurring issue that I have is that I don't really do the same thing every time, hardly at all. Like I keep changing what I'm doing, and it's kind of crazy actually because the longer I do this and the more times I do it, you know, every single one is like one of a kind. I haven't, you know, it's hard to recreate what I do. I kind of have a method, I have a process, and so I just sort of do that, which is I mix by eye and I sort of adjust colors on the fly. And I do a lot of color mixing now more than I used to, but you know, it's unfortunately it doesn't make for a very consistent recipe. When it works, and when it doesn't, well, it doesn't. I mean, I've got a lot of failures to prove that point. So I think what I would say is that you know just spend some time studying color theory, try mixing your own colors, and do a little. And really, this isn't anything fancy. I mean, I'm just adding a teal to lighten up the ultramarine, and just knowing a little bit about the paint is pretty helpful. Um, in a couple of videos ago, I said that one of the best tips that I've ever gotten was from a particular airbrusher in one of the airbrush forums, and he said, you know, when people are just starting out, they should really stick to one type of paint. I have never stuck to one type of paint, and I've had a host of problems, and a lot of the times what will happen is that you'll have incompatible thinners, and even when you're talking about two brands that are theoretically compatible, like you have two water-based colors and they might mix on top of a wet palette, but when you start adding in things like thinners and reducers, reducer is another word for a thinner, depending on which group you're talking to. When you start mixing those up, you know, sometimes you can have some weird reactions. Like Vallejo can react with different types of thinners, or other types of paint will react with different types of, you know, vice versa. You could be spraying a wicked type paint and you'd have a funky reaction with some other brand's thinner. And what'll happen is it'll actually gum up the inside of the airbrush, and then you'll start like getting like these clumps and clogs inside of your nozzle, inside of the body. So all of a sudden the trigger's not pulling back, or the trigger's not returning. So you'll pull the trigger back once, it'll feel real heavy, and then it'll just be stuck open. And then you'll start spraying paint everywhere, and you're just like, you're constantly having problems. And a lot of people say it, and you know, I'm finally learning in my old age that it's true. Like you should really just kind of stick to one type of paint for a while, and if it works, you know, great, stick with it. And you know, I'm the worst offender of anybody, at least early on. I don't hardly buy any water-based acrylics anymore. Mostly because I have a ton. I'm not saying they're bad. I love painting with Vallejo model color, but I would just buy whatever the newest greatest thing was. And there was a run there during the 2012 to 2013 to 2014 2015. I mean, it seemed like everybody and their grandma was coming out with a new type of paint. And to a certain extent, like I think AK Interactive just released their quote unquote third generation. Don't know why I put that in quotes, but they released their third generation acrylics, and they're, you know, the latest, greatest, and the best thing since sliced bread. And there was a tug on it, and I almost did order some. There was a little, like, I could feel something just nibbling at me, that FOMO of having those third gen acrylics and being, you know, on the cutting edge of water-based acrylic technology. But I mean, like, if you look around, and I've said it before, like people like Kirill Kanev, who is an amazing painter, he uses Reaper, and he also uses AK Interactive. Sergio Calvo uses like 99% Vallejo, although he's just recently switched to AK Interactive. They're like doing, I don't know, cross promotion or a sponsorship or something. So he's been using a bunch of them in his work. But it seems like it performs very similar to Vallejo, at least Vallejo model color, as far as brushing it on goes. And yeah, the point is that just really sticking to one brand can iron out a lot of those problems that we have when we first start airbrushing, or even if we've been airbrushing for years and we still haven't figured it out. I don't know who that could possibly be. Then those kinds of things just kind of make our lives so much easier, so much less heartache on the back end. I mean, me personally, I've destroyed I can't even tell you how much money worth of high dollar airbrushes, because I bought airbrushes before I knew any better, and I just started, hammering on them and abusing them, and before you know it, you're spending, $120 to buy a new head for your custom micron, because you just don't know how to use an airbrush. Like you're a novice and you buy like a professional's tool and you destroy it, and then you're just like, man, that one hurt. And I mean, I've replaced probably like a half a dozen nozzles on all of my Badgers. I've sent them in for maintenance. They probably didn't need it, but I mean, they're pretty durable. They're pretty rugged, but you can go way wrong with them. So it's all experience. We're winding up, and I managed to stay slightly on topic, I hope. There's a little bit more that is done here, and at various moments, like I said, I might go back, I might sweeten up the paintwork a little bit, but it wasn't intentionally to mislead or anything. It's just sometimes I have great ideas and there's not a camera nearby, so that's one of the problems when you're painting and you're getting all excited and ahead of yourself, and you forget to capture it. Anyhow, I'm Carlos. This is Scarlet and Sable. I'm glad you guys came and had a look. I hope you guys stick around for the good part. We're getting to the good part. This, unfortunately, is a very slow, tedious part, and it's necessary to do this effect. So, anyhow, I hope everybody's learning something and you're at least enjoying it a little bit. All right. Thanks for coming by, and I'll talk to you in the next one.